Good day, ladies and gentlemen. This is Watson Michael from Ceylon Institute of English and Leadership. And today we have a very special guest with us, all the way from UK, Anna Turns, who is an environmental journalist and the author of Go Toxic Free, Easy and Sustainable Ways to Reduce Chemical Pollution. Also, her publications have been featured in the BBC and The Guardian and several other publications. So, Anna, welcome, and how are you doing today?
Good, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Such an honor, Anna, to have you. So, Anna, what is the reason to name the book Go Toxic Free, Easy and Sustainable Ways to Reduce Chemical Pollution?
So I work in the environmental sector. I'm often writing about really tricky subjects, really tricky things like the climate crisis and biodiversity loss. And if we're too negative about things, it can switch people off. So people kind of just don't want to hear it too much. So I was trying to find a really positive way of talking about chemical pollution, which is a really difficult thing. But Go Toxic Free, it's an active kind of call to action, really. One of the first things I say in the book is that it's impossible to be completely toxic free because we're living in this world, we're surrounded by synthetic chemicals and we can't avoid them altogether. But it's hopefully an empowering and uplifting way of finding ways to reduce your toxic load, basically, the kind of the health impacts, the environmental impacts of all of these chemicals. And I've distilled the science into top tips and easy ways to do that in a really sort of straightforward, easy to apply way at home.
Yeah, so that is something very interesting. Okay, right. So now, based on this, there has been a huge rise in chemical-related health issues. Like sometimes it's affecting the IQ, the fertility, cancer, and many more. So in recent years. And this is, I mean, it's not surprising when over 70% of chemicals used in the European Union are hazardous for health or the environment. So what are your views on that?
It's interesting. So I think our bodies have evolved and they're designed to detox certain things. Like we've always been surrounded by certain poisons in the natural world, for example.
Yeah.
But I think in the last, sort of since the Industrial Revolution, I think that has escalated. So chemical pollution, there's something like, well, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of different synthetic chemicals. But in terms of the escalation, global production of synthetic chemicals has increased from 1 million tons to 400 million tons between 1930 and 2000. So it's just exponential. And it's to do with this overload, I suppose, that our bodies and the soil, the air, the water, everything has kind of got so much excess and so much additional loading of these chemicals that that's then causing human health impacts. And also, I think what's happening in our bodies is reflective of what's happening in the environment as well. We're linked to the place we live in, and it's once things are out in the world, it's very difficult to remediate them and filter them out and get rid of them. So it's really a bit of a wake-up call, actually, in terms of we need to clean up our act. We need to make sure the chemicals that we use are safer and healthier for us and for the planet. And really, we shouldn't be wasting anything. This pollution is waste, and we need to live in a more circular economy. We need to value all of our resources. Chemical pollution is fueled by overconsumption, the same as the climate crisis. This issue is very, very linked to greenhouse gas emissions and the climate crisis that we're facing. It's not a separate issue. It's all part of the same thing. And this excessive industry is fueling both things. So I think it's just about coming back to basics. Do we really need this stuff? We shouldn't be wasting things. How can we use green chemistry and sustainable chemistry to really make sure things aren't going to be hazardous and aren't going to have detrimental health impacts in the long term?
Wow. I mean, it's very interesting, and especially when you say like that, especially with the current climate crisis. I mean, the heat wave, it's crazy across Europe, especially Italy and Spain.
So it's scary, isn't it? Yeah.
It's very scary. Yeah, and we having El Nino around the corner as well, right? I think it's started. Yeah. So could you elaborate about a special chapter in this book?
So my book is a journey through our homes, basically. I go through every room and I look at what's in the kitchen cupboard under the sink, or what's in the bathroom cabinet, for example. And I talk about the different issues and what we can do about it. But actually, when I was prepping for this podcast, I was thinking about which of those I would talk about. And actually, I kept gravitating to the final chapter. So I put together a bit of a manifesto, really, in terms of all of the things that I've learned from talking to scientists and experts around the world through doing this research. And some of it is really quite obvious. None of it's really rocket science, but it's applying these principles to the system, I suppose. So I'm just going to run through really quickly and run through this manifesto for a toxic-free future. So one of the first points is, let's expose the unexposed. So it's about holding power to account, asking questions, finding out what the ingredients are and where they come from, and being really curious about all of those things. Because actually sometimes this pollution is unintentional. It's not always purposeful, but it's just following that and being really sure of where things are coming from and being aware of the dangers and the solutions. Exercise your right to know. So I think every consumer, every person, every one of us has a right to know how something's been tested, and to understand if there's a guarantee that something is really safe, and to understand that science. We shouldn't all need PhDs in chemistry, absolutely. I don't have one, but we should be making sure that those companies can answer those questions, basically. My favorite part of this is less is more. So one of the simplest things we can all do to reduce our chemical footprints is to buy less stuff and just waste less stuff. Just a lot of the things we have and that we are marketed, we don't actually need. And that streamlines everything really, really simply. And it makes us step out of that cycle of consumption and become more citizens rather than consumers, I suppose, and feel that sort of sense of stewardship. Another principle is the polluter pays, not the public. So often there's a lot of onus on us at home doing the recycling or ensuring that something gets disposed of correctly. We, as an industry, it should be the chemical manufacturers that are causing the contamination or producing the things that ensure that that doesn't ever get out into the wider world, or that it isn't made in the first place, ideally. So it's just kind of having that extended producer responsibility, which is a big principle in terms of a circular economy, and really making sure those manufacturers and those retailers stick to their end of the bargain, really. Another principle is eliminate the hazards, not the risks. So for something like toilet bleach, for example, which is really hazardous, yes, you could put it in a cupboard that is locked so your small children or your pets can't access it. But what is better is to not have it in the first place. Don't even have it in the house, and then it isn't a risk that someone is going to drink it or accidentally be exposed to it. So eliminate the hazards, not the risks, and then you don't have to worry about, is something safe, because you trust that things are going to be okay. Another principle is reevaluate and reinvent. So it's this idea of innovation and recreation. And there's some amazing green chemistry institutes around the world who are doing this and being very clever about how they're inventing new ways of producing ingredients, for example, and formulations that don't result in toxic waste, that they keep everything in that system, and that those ingredients are inherently biodegradable as well, and they can be reused, and they can, if they do end up in the soil or wherever, they are going to be, they're not going to be toxic. Towards the end of these 10, so one of my points is look to reach. So the EU has got really brilliant legislation. It's not perfect by any means, but it is really, really good. It's very strong. So we need to make it better. But actually, in terms of global regulation, that's probably the most stringent chemical regulation we've got. So we need to enhance that, basically. And then the last point is look beyond that. So thinking about having more marketing language that is comprehensive and avoiding the greenwash, for example. I talk a lot about greenwash in this book, and just really building on those safety standards. So having something that's very cohesive, I suppose, because our supply chains, we have things that are traveling all around the globe via Sri Lanka, via the UK, all everywhere. And actually, it's really hard to keep track of those things. And if one law is one thing in one place and another in another, it makes no sense and it's quite hard to follow. We need to kind of really think about how we can make this much more coherent and comprehensive, I think, and more robust as well. So it's having that global joined up thinking and thinking about how everything has an impact somewhere, basically. So that's my kind of manifesto really for a better, healthier, safer future.
Wow, yeah, it's well emphasized. It's well emphasized and very well explained. So I can just imagine when you read the book how much knowledge you're going to gain by reading the book alone. And could you tell us a story or with an example how practical this book can be? Because from the last chapter, it sounds very interesting.
So it's practical in many ways. So some of the things that I've learned from writing the book are really quite simple. So things like keeping the bedroom window open at night as much as possible to ensure that toxic chemicals that might be off gas from the mattress, for example, are sort of dissipating out of the room and you're not sleeping in them and inhaling them all night. In terms of a story, one of the biggest wake-up calls I had personally when writing the book is I had my blood tested. So I had my blood tested for persistent organic pollutants, which are these POPs, which are these chemicals. So things like pesticides and flame retardants that just don't disappear very quickly. They linger in our systems and in the environment. And this isn't something that anyone can easily do. I had to kind of go to a special lab. I had to actually send my blood to Norway to a special lab and have it tested. And it was very expensive. It's not a kind of, it's not something that anyone can very easily do. But in terms of what I learned from this, I think it's relevant to all of us. So the scientist that explained my results when they came through, he said, there's no need to be particularly alarmed. There's nothing that's really sky high. And once it's in your blood, it's actually impossible to get it out again anyway. But he said everybody's blood profile, I suppose, tells a story about that person's lifestyle and where they might have been and different things that they have been exposed to during their life. And there were a few things that stood out. So there was one pesticide that had been banned in the UK in 1981. I was born in 1980, so I was a baby. And in terms of exposure, I was probably exposed through my family was a farming family, and it may well have been passed on to me through my mother's blood or breastfeeding, for example. I'm not blaming her at all. But it's a generational thing. So even though I was born in 1980, this chemical has got such a long half-life, which is the time it takes for the chemical concentration to halve. And that for this chemical in particular was about 35 years. So it's decades for it to even halve in concentration. So what struck me was that even though bans work, and they do work, and we need more bans of certain intergenerational. So my children have probably got this pesticide in their blood because I've passed it on to them. It's in me and it's probably gone on to them. So you can't just get rid of it. And there's this real legacy. We talk about legacy contaminants. And so I think it's really being aware of the need for having foresight. So yes, we can all do loads of stuff in our home and we can change what we're buying. But this is why it's so critical that we go to the root cause of all of this and have foresight, and we don't let chemicals come into market until we know they're safe. We don't want to wait decades to find out that they cause cancer or like irritate allergies or affect fertility, all of these things, because actually it's too late then. It's impossible to avoid. So it really was just a bit of a a wake-up call that things linger. So actually the choices we make and the things we buy and the things that we're exposed to every day, like the furniture and if people have synthetic air fresheners, for example, the cumulative impacts of those can actually have a really big impact on our health and on the environment. So it's really about taking a long-term approach to things and not panicking, not kind of going, oh my gosh, I've got to get rid of everything. Just taking a measured approach and think, okay, what are the things that I eat most regularly? Could I choose organic? Could you ditch the bleach cleaners and use vinegar and lemon juice instead? Like, are there simple ways that you could cut out big amounts of these synthetic chemicals that simplify things, will probably save you money too, probably clear up space in your cupboards. There are other benefits as well. And actually that could have longer term positive impacts.
Wow, that was an eye opener. I'm not sure if if a university or a school can cover the bit which you just covered. Okay, it was well emphasized, and you explained it very well. It's well articulated. Yeah. So great, Anna. Great. So Anna, we appreciate you taking time from a busy schedule and doing this podcast with us. Can you give a final message to all the viewers and listeners of this podcast?
So I would urge everybody to ask more questions. So one of the things I say towards the end of the book is I don't have all the answers. I've kind of these goalposts are moving all the time, and it's about holding power to account, and it's about being curious about the world we're living in, basically, and seeking out better alternatives. So I would say ask more questions. If in doubt, don't necessarily buy an alternative. Think about whether you could do without something, and think back to that less is more principle. And also, a lot of the time with eco stuff, people think, right, let's go for the option that is less bad, and let's do less harm. And what I want to flip around in people's minds is the fact that our choices every day in terms of the things we buy and actions we can be positively good. They can be regenerative. You can support companies that are doing amazing things, and you can take actions that are increasing biodiversity in your garden, for example, by not using pesticides, or making choices that aren't less bad but are better all round. And I think that's the beauty of it. I think it can be a really joyful thing. It doesn't have to be a restrictive thing. It can be quite an empowering thing to do.
Absolutely. Wise words. So for all those who want to get Anna's book, you'll find the link where to purchase the book. It'll be on the below part of our podcast, on the audio version as well as the video version. So Anna, thank you very much once again for doing this valuable podcast with us.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Anna.